I'm going to hold off on millions of thank yous for right now. I just want to acknowledge Tim White and Carol Larson with Mount Horeb Fair Maps team and Southwest Wisconsin area progressives. They brought together an astounding group of co-hosts for this, many of whom weighed in on what they wanted the panel to talk about. So I hope I can get through everything. We're going to be talking about the film, and what's happening in the redistricting process and what people are doing or can do to improve maps and representation by elected officials. And we will be hearing about one of the stars of the film has been up to over the past year. So I'll just start with a little introduction about the film and its genesis, and then bring in the panelists. So as I mentioned, I'm a producer on the film. My partner, Jim Crickey, directed, filmed, and edited the movie. So he was really the creative engine behind it. And I'm sorry that he's not here right now. Unfortunately, he had a conflict, but he might be able to jump in and catch some of the conversation. Just a little background about the film, this is not the film that we thought we were going to make, which I think is true of most documentaries. You start with one thing and you end up with something else. We thought that we were following some candidates and issues happening in 2018, which was already pretty ambitious. It was a big year. And ultimately we realized that we had to give a lot more background and history for people to understand what people like Rebecca and Jenny and Sheila were up against, and what gerrymandering even is and why it's so hard to fix. So that kind of expanded the film in a lot of ways. And we also realized as we were making it and showing it to people just how hard it is for anybody to follow state politics. No matter how curious they are, no matter how diligently they are trying to follow it, it's a lot. And we were curious ourselves just to try to understand and piece together what has happened in Wisconsin over the past decade. And so we were kind of learning along the way as we were making it. It's been a great experience sharing it with audiences, and often finding that the people who are most moved by it are not from Wisconsin and just kind of baffled or, curious about what's happening in their own state. So it's been fun to do these Q&As, especially because I get to see Sheila again. So I'm going to turn to the panel now so I can bring her in. So each of you was involved in one way or another with moments or years of some of the issues that were covered in the film. And so I'm going to start by just introducing each of you and asking you to start by sharing a scene in the film, maybe that resonated with you either personally or with your work, just as a jumping off point for your opening remarks. Matt, I think we're going to have bios or links to bios dropped in the chat. So, I think most people know Matt Rothschild as a powerful voice for democracy in Wisconsin. He's, in fact, the executive director of the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign since 2015, and was at the Progressive for 32 years and an editor of the Progressive. We did interview Matt for this film. He was in it for a while, but a lot of things couldn't make it. There was a lot to cover, and Foxconn was too big for this film, so we never got that in there. So Matt, I'll just start off. I'm just curious if there's a scene from the film that resonated with you or the work you've been doing this past year or so.
Well, thanks, Susan, and thanks for making this great film with Jim, and for recording and honoring, the struggles that I think everyone probably who's in on this Zoom call today participated in over the last decade, this hard struggle we've had in Wisconsin against the counter-revolution that Scott Walker and his cronies imposed on us. So I'm really grateful to you for honoring all that work, recording that work for history, so that people will understand what happened here over the last 10 years. What stuck out to me, and I just watched it for the second time a couple days ago, and I really loved it. And what struck me more this time than last time when I was just trying to see who I knew in the film, I guess, was just the humanism of the film. I loved the story of Jenny Arcata, just the way you focused on her. And I didn't realize this the first time, but that illuminated so many issues, the issues of immigration, the issue of a single mother, the issue of low paid work. I mean, she's on the roof there for part of the time, throwing shingles down to a coworker, and the issue of running an uphill battle in a rigged district. I mean, it was all there. And, you know, I just love the little touches. Her boy and the spider. I mean, I love the fact that you kept that in there. I just thought that was a beautiful moment, and it could easily have been cut. And it was just really nice. Another little moment that I thought was great that you included, even though you didn't have time to amplify on it, when you had Molly McGrath from All Voting is Local going door to door, and one of the people she met was someone who was formerly incarcerated, and she asked him, can you vote now? And he said, no, I'm on parole. How long are you still on paper? She asked him. And he said, I'm on for a long time. And then she asked, well, how long? And he said, 2033. I mean, that was breathtaking to me. And that, here's a person who served his time and he still can't vote for more than for more than a decade. I mean, it was just horrifying. And then as far as the work that we do day in and day out on gerrymandering and banning gerrymandering here in Wisconsin, I thought the discussion of Sheboygan and how it was cracked, and the map you had showing shoving people from the center of the city up into the northwestern section, and then from the southern part of the city into the southwestern section, where they're all swallowed up by rural Republican voters. I thought that was a great illustration. I thought Sachin Chetta did an excellent job explaining it too. So those were some of the highlights, but boy, there were just so many. Great film.
Thank you. That was more than I was expecting. It was wonderful to know that you noticed the spider.
Spider was great.
So I'm going to turn to gerrymandering, and I'm going to assume that most of the people on this call tonight saw the film or otherwise already know what gerrymandering is and partisan gerrymandering, and understand how it's negatively impacted their representation. But if there are questions about that, people can put them in the chat. But I'd love for Matt to talk about what's happening right now and just kind of get that out there right away. A lot has happened over the past 10 days. Much of it triggered by the release of the state level census data. I haven't been able to keep up as much as I've tried. Could you brief everybody on what has happened in Wisconsin in terms of redistricting and how you expect it to unfold in the coming weeks?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the census data was late. It finally got delivered as we expected. So the pace right now is really, although a lot's been happening, it was something we predicted and we're totally cool with. What happened over the last 10 days was two plaintiffs, a bunch of Democrats went into federal court to challenge the court to draw a new map, to urge the court to draw a new map, because these old maps, especially with the change of the census data that shows a lot of growth in places like Dane County. So if you use the old maps in Dane County, people in Dane County would be underrepresented. So they went in there. And then there was another good lawsuit filed in federal court by Law Forward on behalf of Voces de la Frontera, Bloc, and the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin with similar arguments. Of course, Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty and the Republicans in the legislature are trying to mount their own legal challenge in state court. Things are going to flow quickly in court and also quickly in the legislature, because right now the legislature is required to vote on these maps to reapportion. That's what the state constitution says. So it's likely that Robin Voss and Devin Lemieux are going to rig the maps again like they did in 2011. Unlike 2011, there is a Democrat in the governor's chair, Governor Evers, who's been very outspoken about this issue of gerrymandering, and he no doubt will veto those maps. And then it's up to the courts to decide what to do. I am hopeful that the courts will rule and give us better maps than we had in 2011, no matter what court it's in, whether it's federal court or state court. I think we got a good shot all the way around. We have a good shot because of the People's Maps Commission, for instance. The People's Maps Commission has done a tremendous job getting a lot of input from citizens. It took hearings in all 7 congressional districts. Citizens, more than 800 citizens submitted maps to the People's Maps Commission. So they'll draw a map and we'll be able to see what a fair map looks like and be able to compare that with whatever rig map comes out.
Yeah.
And maybe judges will take into consideration the map from the People's Maps Commission too.
Could you explain the People's Maps Commission just really briefly? I'm sure a lot of people have participated in it who are on this call, but the genesis of it and where it's active right now, what they're doing today.
Sure. Well, Governor Evers appointed several judges to appoint commissioners to the People's Maps Commission. And those commissioners, then held these hearings across the state and took all this input, talked to experts, got incredible expert testimony, actually. And now they have gotten the citizen input on these 800 maps and the expert advice, and they're going to draw a map with this data that the Census Bureau gave to them. Unfortunately, there's no requirement that the legislature, vote on or even have a hearing on the People's Map. So it's likely that Robin Voss is going to grab the People's Maps Commission map and throw it in the garbage can and then just move with a map of his own. But it will be an excellent illustration of what a fair map looks like or could look like in Wisconsin, and may have some bearing on the judges as well.
I think that we're going to come back to some of the nitty gritty of what people can do and how they can get involved. But I'd like to just turn right now to Marion for a moment, because she has a more personal perspective on the impact of gerrymandering in Wisconsin. She has a really interesting district. Chris is a farmer, small business owner from Blanchardville. She and I just met, but in 2018, when Jim and I were filming, her name kept coming up as someone people said, oh, you should really meet Marion and film her. We were kind of too far along the process to even be thinking about filming more people who were running around every day and really hard to keep up with. I think Jim ran himself ragged just trying to keep up with Jenny and Rebecca, which I'm sure you can relate to. So you ran in 2018. You're probably familiar with some of the people in the film. Could you share a little bit? Is there anything from the film that resonated with you? And what was the experience like from your perspective compared to the film?
Well, first, I just want to say, while I have this opportunity, that Sheila is my hero. I have followed her work for so long. And one of the untold stories in politics is that there really is no actual accountability for government. There really isn't, unless someone like Sheila does the digging and exposes the lack of responsiveness. So I just want to get that out of the way. This film was really meaningful to me because those women running were my friends. That was my first statewide race, even though I'm a county supervisor. And when you saw Becky Clark talk about how we've written letters, we've showed up for protests, we have written postcards, we've gone to public hearings, and now we're running. And that scene in Milwaukee with all of those women, I knew all of them. Many of us were in candidate trainings together, and we really had this feeling that the tide was turning. And when in fact, in that election, 33 of the 99 state assembly races no one even attempted to run. So even though there was a certain feeling that people were engaging, women in particular were engaging, we were fresh faces, new to politics, the truth was, none of us won. In fact, in that race in 2018, when we got all new, when every single, I'm a Democrat, I ran as a Democrat, and all of the state officers that were elected from governor on down were Democrats. Only one single Democrat in the whole state flipped a seat from red to blue. So that tells you just what we're up against with gerrymandering. We felt that we could crack the maps, that we could break them if we worked hard, if we raised money, if we just knocked ourselves out. And my gosh, watching that mom with her kids on the roof, knocking on doors, making phone calls. I mean, that's a great depiction of what it's like. And, you know, incumbents in safe seats do not need to work like that. And in fact, they don't work like that. In 2018, I was in 50 parades. My district is a long, skinny Southwest Wisconsin district, the 17th Senate district where I ran. And there are pieces of 9 counties, in some cases, just one township from a county. It's a meaningless blob of communities that don't have a relationship to each other. The far north, Necedah in Juneau County, is sand country. The topography is flat. The farming is potatoes, veggies. Down where I'm at, it's the driftless region, it's rolling hills, and it's dairy. And so we don't have that much in common, and that makes it hard. When I knocked on doors, I was shocked. I knocked on thousands of doors, just like you saw in the movie. I was shocked to find that most people did not know my incumbent who had been in office since 2010. They had no idea who I was running against, which is really no surprise when you look at the geography you had to cover. I bought a camper to run this race because I was going 2.5 hours north to get to these parades. Sometimes there was an hour and a half between, and you'd pull in at the tail of an end of a parade, me and all my cars that were with me, and we'd be the last entry in that parade, and then we'd go on to the next town. I got really good at doing makeup in the car.
Can I ask about one thing I want to make sure that you hit, because I really enjoyed talking to you about some of this the other night. And one of the things that we found while we were filming, the incumbents against whom Jenny and Rebecca ran aren't really in this film very much. They are a little bit, but they aren't because they weren't visible. They were nowhere to be seen for the most part. And the couple of debates that happened were really because the whole community came out and really pushed. And I wonder what that experience was like for you. Did you have much engagement, and did you have press coverage locally? Like, how did that play out for you with running against an incumbent? And and how does gerrymandering create that situation, I think is what you had told me about.
Well, when districts are safe, politics really aren't that exciting. And I was telling Susan, I was in the New York Times more than I was in the Platteville Journal, which is right smack in the middle of my district, in spite of the fact that I went into the office and talked with the editor probably every other week. Every time I was in town, I stopped in, I gave him updates on where I was going to be. In these districts, you get in the paper once when you announce, you send in your press release, and that's published. And then at the end, there's a candidate survey, and that gets published. And that's really all you get from the local papers. It's really hard to make your case. It's really hard to hold incumbents accountable. And, you know, in 2018, when none of these seats flipped, it wasn't because everybody was so happy with their representatives. We were losing 2 dairy farms a day, which we still are. We were still far, like a decade behind our neighbors in broadband coverage. And we had been in 2018, we had already been 3 years at the bottom of the nation, dead last for entrepreneurship in Wisconsin. So things weren't going great. It's not that people were so satisfied with their lot. It's just that they don't hear about politics because it's really a non-issue. The person I ran against, his bio says that he was raised in Spring Green. When I visited Spring Green, went to the shops, went to the restaurants, people said to me, Howard Markline has never shopped in my store, but you come here weekend after weekend and we see you all the time. And that's how it can be in a gerrymandered district. You really don't have to show up. And that's what Sheila's work showed, is that no matter what your constituents think, it doesn't matter. When this state representative has to somehow get to 9 counties, I'm a county supervisor. Neither of those representatives has ever come to my county board, and they don't go to the other county boards too. There's no time to get around to county board meetings when there's that many. So the lack of responsiveness is, I think, the worst part of gerrymandering, but the other part is the extreme polarization that happens between the parties. Prior to 2011, almost everybody that you talk to in the legislature will tell you that they worked together, that there was a value on working together. We did things in my district, like the lower state Wisconsin Riverway. It's a protected district. It was an environmental victory, and that was a bipartisan thing. But those kind of things don't happen anymore. And I think that we're falling farther and farther behind in our ability to be civil, because people don't have to be responsive to actual human beings in their district.
Well, that's a great transition to bring Sheila into the conversation, since that's, so much of what she's shown us. I think Sheila doesn't really need much of an introduction, certainly to those who've seen the film or who have followed her work. Jim and I met Sheila before this had really become a film, and we interviewed her for a while because she had been mentioned in a Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism series on democracy, or it was called Undemocratic. And we were really curious about her, and that very long interview really kind of set us off on the road of this film, because it was just so inspiring. She has a very deep background as an activist, more than we share in the film, and in McFarland, in Milwaukee, in past work of hers. And I think she's really been inspiring to a lot of people through this film. We keep hearing from people who are, one of these days we're going to make Sheila for President t-shirts. I don't know if we keep getting asked, but one of these days. So Sheila, first, just because we've never talked about it, I'm going to start with the question of was there a scene that you'd like to mention that really resonated with you, or that had a personal connection for you? Obviously, you're in many of them.
True, but I was trying hard to think of what scene sticks in my mind, and I'm in it, but you wouldn't know it. It's that crush in the hallway before the public hearing in the prior to the lame duck session. And the reason, because we're talking so much about the gerrymander, the reason that scene resonates with me is that, to me, it is a microcosm of the gerrymander effect. People trying to make their voices heard, an officer standing at the door. The message is, this door is closed to you, and we will not listen to your voice. And to me, that is just what the gerrymander says to all of us. So that's the scene that I cannot get out of my mind. And I was, in fact, in that crush.
Yeah. It's a very emotional moment in history. I mean, I've watched it so many times, and I get very worked up and emotional about it. Just the beauty of all of the people who are, there to testify is just also inspiring. I think everybody on this call is familiar with your work, telling feedback that Wisconsin legislators receive, and showing how frequently their votes don't reflect their constituents' opinions. But they may not know that you share those findings on your website, We the Irrelevant, which is now in the chat, and that you're still doing it. And you've done a lot since the film that we've continued to talk about. It would be great to hear a little about the new inquiries that you've been doing. And I think you've been doing some pretty revealing stuff this past year.
Yes, I did. At the end of May, I sent one out on gerrymandering. I did one of these panels with the League of Women Voters, and they were involved in it and discovered that they, in fact, had urged their mailing list to contact legislators about the gerrymander. So the truth to tell, I wasn't going to do another open records request. It's tiring. But someone said on that conversation, but we're sending all of these emails. How are we going to know if you don't ask for them? So I couldn't have an answer to that. I said, okay, I'll ask. And so I did. I did it in such a way that I didn't get all of the numbers. I know there are many more numbers that the league can document, but I wanted to get something quickly. And so I still have 14 legislators. I queried the whole legislature, sorry. And the current count is 953 of those contacts opposed to gerrymandering, and 2 who are not opposed. They're in favor of it. Those are the kinds of numbers I get all the time.
Sheila, we just had I know you have another one to talk about, but we just had a question about whether or not you have to pay for any of these requests. And I think that you've got some, you've got an answer to that.
Yes, I will tell you that I have never paid, except when I was temporarily disabled and needed records. Those were the days of all paper. I needed them mailed to me. And so, because I could not go to the clerk's office and read them. That's no longer the case, because now I only ask for electronic records. And this time, 3 senators have decided that I should pay. So far, no one else has done that. Their names are going to be in the chat, because I think it might be a good idea to contact them and say, you don't think this is a very good idea. There they are: Senator Fan of Fond du Lac, Senator Jagler of Watertown, and Senator Capenga of Delafield. The aggregate of their 3 charges is over $320. Now, these are public records. They are merely custodians, not owners. And that is what I believe, and so that is why I will not pay. And if I don't pay, I wrote to them and told them that that the law says that charging a fee is a choice, and I asked them to make a different choice. And so far, only Fan has responded, and he has said, "Oh, your request has been fulfilled. The records are there at the chief clerk's office, and she'll send them to you." And my response to him was, you are charging me over $100. I don't have it. Therefore, I don't have the records. Therefore, my request has not been fulfilled. I don't expect to hear any more from him. So there's 3 of those. The answer is, rarely am I asked to pay a fee. When I am, I will not pay.
So there's, kind of an, I don't want to say an irony, but what we see from your work is somewhat counter to what many of us learned our whole lives about how we interact with our government. We are constantly, even now, being told to write to our representatives. And I'll mention a quick story that my brother-in-law took his 8th grade class to DC a couple of years ago, and they met with their congressperson, and one of the aides was there, and one of the kids asked, "What do you do when we send you letters?" And the aide said, "Oh, we don't do anything with those. Those don't really, nobody ever really reads those." He got a little talking to from an 8th grade teacher. But you have said that it really does matter, even though you're showing that their votes are counter to what they're hearing. Why should we keep doing this? Why should we keep sending these things? Should we?
Yes, it's a good question. And I'll preface my remarks by saying, if you keep writing, I'll keep asking. You're right. It does not affect their vote, that's because the gerrymander protects them from your vote. They ignore your messages. They hope to discourage you and thereby shut you up. If you stop writing and calling, they not only have nullified your vote, they have silenced your voice. They want you to just go away. Don't do it. Please don't do it. I'm currently, I wanted to talk about another inquiry that I made.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just in August 8th, I sent it out on election fraud, because Janelle Branchen of Menominee Falls was quoted as saying that they've been getting thousands of messages from people. And I thought, well, there's a challenge. I want to know if they're getting thousands. And they are. I need to tell you that the big lie is working spectacularly well in Wisconsin and no doubt elsewhere in the country. I've only counted 16 of the 82 Republicans I queried, and the number of people who believe there was fraud, and many of whom are demanding a forensic audit. I'm not sure any of them really knows what that means, but that's what they're asking for, because Mike Lindell, the pillow guy, is telling them that's what they should be asking for. 4,489 already contacts to the legislature. And the number of people who write and who have written and said, there was no fraud. What's the matter with you people? Stop wasting my tax money on this. That number is at 518. So we have so far 90% who think there was fraud and are demanding an audit, and 10% who are saying no. And what I would love is to be able to count more and more people who wrote and said there is no fraud. So if you can think of no other reason to write to it to make me happy.
That's as good a reason as I need. Sheila, question. You had mentioned 3 legislators, Fionn Jagler and Kapenga, but there were 2 others who you had shared their emails with us.
Right, and Nancy Vandermeer and Adam Nealon. They didn't ask me for money, but they both have said they have no records. Now, that makes no sense at all. And I've told them that I can document that they were each CC'd on right now as many as 44 or 45 emails. And so I've told them both that I will publish the count of the CCs, and I will also make it clear that they have said they have no records. And to both of them, I suggested that is not a good look. But I doubt that they really care about that kind of thing. It makes me feel good to say it, so I do.
Do you track phone calls, constituent phone calls at all?
Yes, if they've taken notes, I ask for phone calls, and sometimes I get them. Sometimes I'm told the phone notes from phone calls are included here. Occasionally, I get handwritten, scribbled notes that someone, yeah. So I do ask for all of that. But I ask only for citizen correspondence. And Nealon is a prime example of what I consider to be utter contempt for the spirit of the law, because what he sent me, 39 pages, none of which was citizen correspondence. It was bills, it was inter-office communications. It was nothing. I mean, I've had that before. And I think it's a measure of contempt. Who cares what you asked for? This is what I'm sending you. Now you have to read it. Now you have to read through it. That's how I feel when I get that stuff. Whether I'm correct or not, I don't know. But that's the way it is.
Yeah, yeah. Matt, I wanted to turn back to you, and I've been talking to people about this, the the past couple of days, which you know better than I'm sure, how much Wisconsin in its history has served as a laboratory for policy making from both the left and right, and often a model for a lot of activism throughout its history. And I'm wondering if you're looking at this moment in Wisconsin's history, if you could envision, like, if something is going to come out of this moment as this is what is impacting the world right now, and a positive seed, let's say, what is that positive seed that Wisconsinites are planting? Are there, or should there be?
Well, you're right, Susan, in that Wisconsin was a laboratory for democracy for decades, starting with the progressive movement in the early part of the 20th century when Fighting Bob LaFollette was governor, and then when he was senator, and then we had other progressive governors, and we passed all sorts of pro-democracy legislation that got on the books here. And then all the way through the 1950s, when we were the first state in the country to let public sector workers organize. We were really setting the pace for what a progressive government could be statewide. And then now we've not a laboratory for democracy, we're a laboratory for plutocracy, a laboratory for ALEC, as was depicted in the film so well. But Scott Walker lost for re-election, and I think that gave a lot of people on the progressive side a lot of hope. You could hear, half the state exhaling or cheering loudly, depending on how old we were. And then what is exciting to me is the great grassroots movements we're seeing in Wisconsin. First of all, Black Lives Matter had tremendous protests last year. Let's remember this. There were protests in 4 dozen communities in Wisconsin, not just Madison, Milwaukee, Kenosha, and Racine. There were protests in cities and towns and villages that had never seen a protest before, a civil rights protest before. And so that's very exciting to me. There's a lot of action on the climate front, and there's huge action on this issue of banning gerrymandering. Look at the map in purple over my shoulder there, depicting the 56 out of 72 counties that have now passed referendums or resolutions urging the legislature to ban gerrymandering. I used to schlep around a cardboard map that was mostly white, that mostly had counties that hadn't passed these referendums or resolutions. But over the last 3 or 4 years, thanks to a lot of great grassroots organizing, some of it spontaneous, some of it done by great grassroots organizers like Carleen Betchen, county after county has passed these resolutions, some also done by great county board members like Hans Breitenmoser in Lincoln County. We don't have 56 blue counties in Wisconsin. We don't have 36 blue counties. We don't have 26 blue counties in Wisconsin. And this is an issue, banning gerrymandering, that appeals to people across party lines. I think still in Wisconsin, the vast majority of Wisconsinites just want a level playing field. They just want fair play. And it was interesting, Jenny talked about fairness in the very last tiny 20 seconds of your film. And I still think we can play on that chord, that people want fairness and fair play in Wisconsin. So these kinds of mass movements give me hope for sure.
That's great. I think that's one of the things that we wanted to have everybody hit on, is just what gives you hope, because I think that's definitely one of the things in showing the film and trying to portray it correctly is we didn't want to sugarcoat reality, but the people like Jenny and Rebecca and Sheila who are, continuing to chip away and make a difference are really hopeful. So I'm going to ask Chris the question about what's giving you hope now as you're looking at not just at Wisconsin, but your district or the country. I mean, what's keeping you hopeful?
Well, I've run twice and lost twice narrowly in a district that is thought to be pretty purple. But if you look at that map, there's a big white rectangle right in the middle of my district, where we can't even on my county board pass a resolution against gerrymandering. But I've gone at it 3 times at the county level. And I will say that people now know what gerrymandering is. They didn't in 2018 when I was knocking on doors, when I was talking about gerrymandering, when I was talking about fairness. Mostly what I heard from people was, Chris, you're never going to have fairness. All politicians are corrupt. That's just the way it is. And I heard that a lot. I think now people understand gerrymandering. They understand money in politics in a way that they didn't used to. I think the films, the art, the protests, the constant seeing, Black bodies shot over and over again are making people realize things aren't fair. They are corrupt. And there's a reason for that. And I think that before people didn't quite, if you can't get your mind around what a reason might be, it's hard to fight it. And I do think that we have a clear picture of what's wrong with our democracy. Whether we have the energy and gumption to change it, that remains to be seen. But I think the first step is understanding it. And so those of you who are in the business of educating the rest of us, thank you. I think it's working.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's great. Sheila and I've talked about the same question and, the education of our communities. And one of the first panels that we did together, it was actually many months ago. And one of the questions that Sheila got was, what keeps you going? And her answer that a lot of people continued to talk about after that panel was anger. Which is something that I share. I mean, anger keeps a lot of us kind of motivated and focused and going. But it can't be the only thing, or you're gonna, blow up. So do you still feel that way?
Sure, there's a lot to be angry about.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right, you can't be angry all the time. And so I need to find other things to motivate me. One of them is that people now, there are expectations out there, so are you going to do this? Are you going to send another query? That's helpful. I mean, it says I have to do it, but it's helpful to motivate me to do it. I've had some real difficulty with this query on the election fraud. Reading thousands of emails, I can only do a few a day because they're very upsetting. I think I said recently to somebody that I wasn't sure it was going to be good for my mental health. There is a sense of unreality in these emails. People saying we need to have the truth. Well, you have the truth and you don't believe it. So, I mean, that's terribly frustrating. I've had to help myself get past that reaction and just tally them, which is, I've made it now. I'm there.
How about hope? How about hope? Where do you get, where's your hope?
Yes, and I'll go back to what Matt was saying. The hope is in, look at the list of organizations that have sponsored this event. Those organizations represent a lot of people, a lot of energy, a lot of dedication. The other thing that gives me hope is the people you introduced us to in the film. And Chris is right here, although she wasn't featured in the film, but Chris is one of those people who gives me hope. Jenny Estrada, Rebecca Clark, Molly McGrath, all the people you introduced us to, who to me, exemplify the best of Wisconsin. And the very fact that they exist and they're out there doing their thing, that's what gives me hope. And that's what keeps me going, because if for no other reason, I'll send the next open records request for them, because
Awesome.
they're working hard and I can do the same.
Awesome. That's great. Matt, not everybody is on all of the same chats, but there've been a lot of questions about the map behind you that you talked about. I just wanted to mention, I think that Carlene was dropping into the chat where people could get it. But when we did use that map in the film, and we kept having to update it, which was great. And it's really exciting to see it behind you now as purple as it is. Sorry, Chris, for the little white spot there.
And I want to thank Beverly Speer, who was always getting that map updated and has done a great job with resources at the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. You know, when Sheila was talking, I was reminded of a famous Mark Twain line, which says, what bothers me is not what people don't know, but what they know for sure. And that's certainly true of some of these folks out there. And also Sheila mentioned the organizations that have co-sponsored this. And one of the things that gives me hope is that, you know, in the nonprofit pro-democracy sector here in Wisconsin, we are all working together. This isn't a paper coalition. This is an actual organic, dynamic coalition that meets every week, every 2 weeks. We share strategies. We plan events together. We work very harmoniously together. You know, we've torn down our silos. We've tried to shelve our egos, and we're really, you know, doing the work that needs to be done, whether it's, you know, it's the ACLU and it's League of Women Voters and Common Cause, Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, Fair Elections Project, and a whole bunch of other organizations. You know, we're working together, I think, as a model for other states where sometimes, you know, people are fighting among themselves. Maybe that Scott Walker kicked us in the teeth so many times that people realize that our little petty infightings needed to end, and we got to work together if we're going to change the state. But whatever the reason is, we are working together right now, and it's to me, it's really gratifying. And you know, a lot of the people I'm working with are a lot younger than I am, with a lot more energy, and certainly a lot more skill and technical and social media stuff than I got. And that gives me hope too.
Well, speaking of technical and social media thing, I want to also thank Beverly, because she made this whole Zoom thing happen, and it was not easy. So I wanted to also mention that. And I have some other thank yous, but I think I'd love to see if, I don't think there are any questions that we haven't worked into the conversation. And Carlene Betchen is here. And I think that she had a few things that she wanted or was willing to say about kind of next steps that people can get involved in. I think what Matt was saying is something that I've observed and never really thought about so much, but I haven't seen the level of cooperation amongst organizations that has happened in Wisconsin before. I mean, and it seems sort of a new thing. I'm not really familiar with how that evolved, which is really interesting to me. But I know Carlene, every time I talk to somebody in Wisconsin about fair maps, they say, Carlene is talking to everybody. Everybody knows Carlene, and she's keeping everybody together and talking and communicating. So would you be willing to talk a little bit about that?
You know, it's kind of ironic because I am not of the nonprofit world, and I didn't know about the silos that Matt talked about. So I'm a retired educator, and when you're a teacher and you're working in a school, if you don't collaborate with your colleagues, you're sunk, right? I mean, that's the way we are successful. And I guess I just sort of went into this work with that attitude that why wouldn't we work together? So I have to say, I haven't experienced what Matt talked about needing to tear down silos, because since I've been in this work, and I was hired in 2019, it's not worth it to have those silos up, right? I mean, we're all working for the same goal. And if we claim territory and we don't collaborate, we only hurt ourselves. So that hasn't been my experience, and so I'm very happy about that. a couple of things that I posted in the chat as attachments. People will have to click on them to open them. We're having a legislative lobby day, and on September 27th, we made the decision today because of the uptick in the really transmissible Delta variant of COVID that it's going to be an all virtual event. So that actually feels like a big relief to me because I was very concerned about that portion and about just exposing folks. So we will have 3 pre-lobby virtual trainings for people, and we'll group them according to their Senate districts. So in each Senate district, there are 3 nested assembly districts. So we're hoping for teams of at least 3 representing each of the assembly districts in our state. And already we have over 40 people registered, and we haven't really started to publicize. So we're really hopeful that we have hundreds of people who engage in this and are part of meeting with their legislators and advocating for fair maps. So that's our big push and our big ask right now. And of course, we're monitoring all of the legislation that, or not legislation, litigation that Matt alluded to, just seeing how this plays out now that the census data has been released and the act of redistricting is actually officially underway.
I think we're going to be sending out, there'll be a follow-up email with all of the various things that Carlene was talking about and all of the links that she's been sharing, just to kind of try and capture it. She's just a font of resources. So I'm really grateful for her putting this in. I'm gonna, let's see. Someone would be interested in Matt talking a little bit more about the litigation, and I'm not sure, on what specific part of it, but if there's anything that you think there's a little bit more nuance to where it stands or what the expectations are, I think it would be helpful.
So the 2 lawsuits that we're happy about, one is by this National Democratic group with Wisconsin plaintiffs, and that is urging the court just to draw the maps because they're arguing that it's very unlikely that the legislature and the governor are going to agree on a map, and by using the old maps, you can't run another election on these old maps that a federal panel, several years ago said was the most gerrymandered map in modern American history. So, and now with the increase of population in places like Dane County and the decrease of population elsewhere, there's no longer one person, one vote. And there's established US Supreme Court rulings dating back to the 1960s that says, you can't have districts where there are many more people in one district than are in another district. That violates one person, one vote, because the ones who are crowded into a district with more people have less of a vote than the people who are in the other district. So that's the legal leg that they're standing on. And then joining in a similar lawsuit in federal court is our ally Law Forward. And Law Forward gives me hope too. This is a new law firm in Wisconsin as of the last year or so that is acting as a vigorous attorney for the good guys and a strong opponent to the right-wing Bradley funded Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. So Law Forward, taking on 3 plaintiffs, the League of Women Voters, Bloc, and Voces de la Frontera, those are the plaintiffs that it is supporting in another federal filing, making some of the similar arguments that the other lawsuit made. And then there's a Republican lawsuit to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, urging the Wisconsin Supreme Court to take all this on, without going through the lower courts. And it's unlikely, in my opinion, that they're going to do that because they've already said several times they don't like this, we're going to bypass the lower courts and go straight to the Wisconsin Supreme Court practice that Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty it keeps trying to do. So I think on a timetable, it's likely that the legislature is going to submit a map by the end of October, I believe. Evers is going to veto that map, and then the courts are going to have to hurry up and make a decision because by about December 15th, candidates need to start filing their nomination papers, and they got to know which district they're in when they're running. And so the clock is going to move pretty quickly now in the next several months. But on the legal front, I just want to reassure everybody that there are some outstanding lawyers at Law Forward, outstanding lawyers at the Democratic Plaintiffs Group. They've got things under control and really high-powered legal advice on these matters. I also saw in the chat there was a question about litigation. I do want to just put forward the fact that there's a great piece of legislation in the Assembly and in the State Senate. In the Assembly, it's AB 395. This is a piece of legislation submitted by Representative Deb Andraka. And then there's a Senate bill from Jeff Smith, who's been with us for a long time on this issue, including when he was back in the Assembly. And this is Senate Bill 389. And just so Sheila's got something to track, you might want to send emails to your legislators urging them to support AB 395 and SB 389 and demand a public hearing. My God, a vast majority of Wisconsinites want this legislation, which would ban gerrymandering. The least they could do, the very least, is to give us a public hearing on this. In the past, we haven't gotten a public hearing. We need, at the bare minimum, a public hearing, but we should have a vote on this too. So anyway, those are a couple of things people can do. And that's kind of how I see, the next couple of months going as far as the litigation goes.
Fantastic. I think Carlene has dropped the list and some things in the chat, but I think it's really important to be able, as I said, starting out, it's very hard to keep track of all of this. And all of the co-hosts of this screening, and especially the Fair Maps Coalition, which most of them are a part of, are really helping people keep track, understand what's changing and what they can do. So if you're able to become a member, if you're not already, go through that list. We'll be sending it out again tomorrow. It's just a phenomenal group of organizations, and they'll help you get engaged or support them. And I want to really thank Tim White and Carol Larson with Mount Horeb Fair Maps team and Southwest Wisconsin area progressives. They just brought together an astounding group of co-hosts for this. It was really an amazing group, and very impressive that they were able to bring everybody together for one event like this. So I'm hats off to the two of them. And a huge thanks to Beverly Speer for managing this today. A couple of things that I wanted to say, and if anybody else has some last minute things, but I think we might want to end on time. The film is still available for people who have signed up for this to watch until midnight if you didn't get through the whole thing. And after that, it's on, we have a website. You can find links to watch it on Amazon or Vimeo. And we're doing more things like this. If you know organizations that would like to do a screening conversation, we're happy to do more of these. But we're also, with Bullfrog Films, which is an educational distributor, we're making it available to universities, schools, public libraries, and we have, I'm not going to say it's a full-on curriculum, but a pretty great discussion guide with resources about all of the issues in the film, including women running for office and what those statistics are and what the challenges are. A lot of things about, voter ID laws, not just gerrymandering, and a lot about Wisconsin's history as a policy leader. So if you know any educators, please, let them know about it. It's got a lot to talk about, and so grateful for everybody for coming out for this and having this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. It was great. Thanks, Susan.